My intro is like this tonight of stuff that I want to talk about, but I'll do the best with the hour that I've got, including the story of the day. But I guarantee this is the first time that you've heard the story of the day. It's about the future of our country, and the stakes couldn't be higher. It's about the education system, and it's about the ongoing failures of the education system for that next generation. The entire reason we work as hard as we do is to make sure that the generations that come after us will have a better time. The reason people defend this country is so they can have a free nation that the school kids of Australia would be able to inherit. But part of that responsibility of us as parents, grandparents, governments and educators is to make sure that the school system readies future Australians for life as it will be. But as we have shown you relentlessly at the start of the show, not just a little mention somewhere before we go because it was a thing that was around today, at the start of the damn show, at the start of the week, we have talked about the problems in our education system, including, remember how we've hit the worst standards in education over the past 15 years. Now, you know that one of the reasons that I'm particularly involved and focused on this issue is, yes, because I have school-aged children, but also because I've always been very honest with you that I'm somebody who didn't do very well at school, and while I will never blame the barriers that were in my head at times to being able to get the best result out of school, I want to make sure that kids who have difficulties like I had at school will be able to get around them. As I've shared with you in the past, and anyone who's watched the show knows, that sometimes I find it a little hard to read long passages quickly on television. I am a high-functioning dyslexic. But I want to make sure that kids that are in that situation don't fall through the traps. And we keep being told that the millions and billions of dollars that we spend all the time when it comes to school is going to prevent that. But as you know, let's look at some charts here. This is the performance of Australian schools over the past 15 years. Now, as you can see here, when it comes to mathematics, our standards have precipitously fallen since 2002 all the way to 2022. When it comes to the literacy standards, when it comes to science, this green one shows you that while we're slightly up, we are still way behind where we were back in the early 2000s. And when it comes to reading, you can see where we were in 2000 and where we are in 2022. Now, I've told you before, we spend about $300 billion on education every 10 years, yet the result of the past 20 years is exactly what I have shown you. I've talked about how the people that are in charge of the future of our country, those people who are at the head of state and federal government, well, they get together every now and then and they parade around at election time when it comes to going to places like schools, but they all kind of disappear when the news gets difficult. They don't follow through. You see, maybe there's part of the Australian electorate that unless it is about you, and you personally, you don't care. But I don't believe that's the case. Everyone's got some connection to kids that are at school right now, from the first day of kindy to the final year of their high school examinations. Well, today, a new report that should have been the headline story today. You should have heard about it before 9 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight tonight, which is that 1 in 3, a third of Australian school students can't read properly. Now, this is a major problem. It is, as they say, a 5-fire alarm. Now, this was a populist, youth-focused website that I think is owned by Channel 9. But the actual report comes from the Grattan Institute, but I'll read the summary rather than get too lost in the details, because we'll do that as the next couple of days roll on. The report published by the research group, the Grattan Institute, and this is a left-wing think tank, says that 1/3 of school children are being failed by an education system that uses discredited theories to teach reading. It calls the failure a preventable tragedy, and it says that this is because we are based on, or the cause rather, is based on, see, perfect example about moving words around, on decades of disagreement about how to teach reading. In the typical Australian school classroom of 24 students, 8 can't read well, says the lead researcher. Australia is failing these children. Now, there is slightly a bit of good news compared to where we were when those 20-year tables came out, which is that the 6 p.m. news, which still an extreme number of Australians get their main source of information from. I'm glad that you're here in the front row watching us, watching all the other shows, going to skynews.com.au. But there's certainly an awful lot of people that are watching the free-to-air commercial television news, and this is how they reported this story tonight.
We are failing our children. That's the blunt assessment from experts who've investigated why 1 in 3 Australian school students can't read well.
Australian teaching methods are in the firing line, with a new study revealing 1 in 3 children can't read properly. The Grattan Institute says schools should overhaul their reading programs and focus on phonics to help bring students up to speed.
Good. So the news was starting to get out today. But on Channel 7, this was considered more important news than the numbers we have been talking about tonight. This story that I'm about to show you was given greater prominence, was put closer to the front of the bulletin, meaning that even more people would see it, than the dim future when it comes to Australia and education.
His San Francisco 49ers lost the Super Bowl to the Kansas City Chiefs in a thrilling overtime finish, but for many the game itself was almost relegated to a sideshow.
It's brilliant.
America's first couple of pop culture.
Now, did I watch the Super Bowl? You betcha. Did I love every little minute of it? Do I congratulate the Kansas City Chiefs? You betcha. Do I think Patrick Mahomes is second only to Tom Brady? Yes. Do I understand the power of Taylor Swift, particularly as she's about to sell out around the country? Yes. But do I recognise that a more important story for the country is that a huge proportion of our kids can't read? No question in question time. No discussion in the all-day, everyday conversations that sit around Australian politics. No premiers being asked questions about this today. The only thing I could find was a less than 10-second clip that was on the Channel 10 news tonight of the Education Minister, and he's basically saying throw more money at the problem. But no urgency, no demand for accountability, no ideas about how to save a generation. Instead, it's a really bad problem, but it's not as interesting a story as Taylor Swift and her boyfriend and a football game in the United States, as important as that game may be. It ain't as important as this. But there was one Premier who was talking education today, and that is the Western Australian Premier. But was he talking about the falling literacy, numeracy, scientific standards? No. Instead, the focus of his government, with his supermajority where they can do no wrong in the West Australian Parliament, is they are now talking about what your kid can have in their lunchbox.
Processed meats, pies, ham and so forth should be considered treat foods, not everyday foods.
For God's sake. Really? The priority of somebody in charge of a state government where the education system is falling and collapsing right now is what's in your lunchbox. Now, do I understand the idea of good food in and better mental results out? Sure. But let's get them reading before we start worrying too much about what is in their lunchbox. We'll talk about this in some detail tonight. Great show. Looking forward to this conversation where we're going to have, of course, none other than Bronwyn Bishop's here. We're also going to have James Morrow, Nicholas Rees. It'll be a good debate, and we will have it here because this story matters.